We stand against totalitarianism, particularly imperialist expansionist totalitarianism. We are for democracy and human rights, and we are for a worldwide prosperity that only free economies can give, and the pursuit of human happiness that only political freedom allows.
Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening from wherever you're coming from. This is the Andrea Shaffer Show, and today I am thrilled to have Trevor Loudon. He's an international expert, author, filmmaker, and has his own website, KeyWiki, and what he specializes in is communist revolutions and who are behind these individuals. He's written multiple books. The last one that relates here to America is Stealth, which explains Kamala Harris's communist roots. And he has now just published another book that deals with Australia that's out for purchase. If you can explain that book to us, that would be awesome, Trevor.
Well, thanks, Andrea. That's called Comrade Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's 40-year alliance with Australian communism. And it's about the Australian Prime Minister who is very pro-China, who is very anti-America, and is leading Australia down the communist road. And when I say communist, I don't mean liberal or progressive. He is a hardcore revolutionary communist, and he's now the second term Prime Minister of Australia, which was once one of our most valuable allies in the South Pacific against the Chinese, and now is being run by a pro-China communist.
Great, thank you, Trevor. And we'll go back to where people can find you and your work throughout the episode. The timing with Trevor today is just like impeccable based on what we've been watching in Minneapolis over the weekend and for the last month or two, or frankly, for quite some time. I believe in my heart of hearts that Minneapolis was targeted decades ago in order to be the testing ground, the ground zero of, the communist color revolution. So let's just start there, Trevor. I'm going to just show a media clip from a recent event that happened last Friday, and it is of a Minnesota CARE representative, Jamal Hassan. And then there are certain organizations that you can see as far as flags in the background that you have spoken about extensively and written about extensively as far as the first George Floyd riots in 2020. And many people are calling this the ICE George Floyd riots 2.0. So I'm going to add the media assets in just a minute. Hold on, please. Okay.
Thank you, son, brother. How you doing? I want to just thank all of you for being here today. Thank you for showing up. You did the most important thing. You are here right now. Say her name. Say her name. Say her name. Hey, folks, we are at a cross point. We did not do what was necessary to end police brutality after the murder of George Floyd. We are getting a second chance to do it right after the murder of Nicole Good. We have a second chance to do this right. Minneapolis, we are in the camp one more time again. We are here at another moment to say to this nation.
So that was Jelani Hassan, the Minnesota CARE representative. And then if you looked in the background, it had the Freedom Road Socialist Organization also at the rally. So why don't you start back to George Floyd 2020 and how the different organizations have participated and actually had the playbook in hand, just waiting for the right event to happen.
Yeah, look, as we've talked, Andrea, Minnesota has been under communist domination since the 1930s, 1920s. But in the modern era, the most dangerous and violent communist party of many in Minnesota is the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. Now, they came out of the Maoist pro-Chinese movement of the 60s, the anti-Vietnam War protesters, SDS, the Weathermen, all of that. That's where they come from. They're Maoists, and they're openly pro-communist China. They send people to China. They're also deeply in bed with Venezuela and Cuba. They are hardcore, violent communists, and their headquarters are in Chicago and the Twin Cities. Now, in 2019, they started an organization called the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. And they're nationwide, and because they operate all over the country, and their job was to find in 2020 instances of police brutality against Black or brown Americans. And there's about 1,100 people are killed by the cops every year, and about 20% of those are going to be Black or Latino as a proportion of the population. It's not hard to find a controversial case to stir up trouble. Now, they tried to start the rioting in Atlanta, Georgia, when a so-called jogger was killed by 3 local men, and then that didn't quite work. Then they tried to start it again with when Breonna Taylor was killed in Louisville, Kentucky, in a police raid. That didn't work. George Floyd was attempt number 3. And it worked because it was so public, and it was right in the Twin Cities headquarters of this communist group. That's why within 2 days, it was all over the country, because they were all ready to go. They had their bricks, they had their training, they had their groups all ready to go. All these pro-Chinese communists. And the day President Trump was inaugurated, first time in 2017, January, the head of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization declared publicly at a rally in Washington, D.C., Steph Yorick has declared several times since, our job is to bring down the president by making the country ungovernable. They're still putting that on their website today. So what you're seeing in Minnesota now is the Freedom Road Socialist Organization trying to repeat George Floyd. They're joined by the Communist Party USA. They're joined by Democratic Socialists of America. They're joined by CARE and several immigrants' rights groups. But every communist organization in America is in there stirring up trouble. They are all aligned to Venezuela and Cuba and China. So this is foreign agents trying to start a revolution in the United States and using ICE so-called atrocities in the same way they used the police killing of George Floyd to start trouble. George Floyd was a lucky break for them, but if George Floyd hadn't happened, the riots would have started with Jeff Jones in Seattle the next week, or Fred Smith in Tucson the week after. It was going to happen. They were just waiting for the appropriate spark. And they've been.
So how can you apply this to today?
Sorry?
How can you apply this to today? What's going on? We're watching businesses board up their businesses in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Thank goodness it's really cold out there. I don't want to wish that on anybody, but it's so cold. I think it's preventing the firecracker from actually, igniting a much bigger explosion.
Look, I said during the George Floyd riots, I could have given the FBI a list of 100 key activists, and if they'd arrested them, the whole thing would have shut down. They need to be targeting the leadership of Freedom Road right now. They should be on their case. They should be having them under 24-hour surveillance. They should be looking at the leaders of the Communist Party USA and Democratic Socialists of America. If they surveilled about 100 key people and kept on their case and arrested them if they broke the law, they could shut this down.
So what is the organization Liberation Road?
Liberation Road is an offshoot. See, when Freedom Road started in the 80s, it was the Mao. But in 1998, Freedom Road split into two organizations, both called Freedom Road. And it was a very confusing situation. One of them was the Freedom Road we see today, which is very violent, very active, very openly pro-China. The other Freedom Road was more willing to work inside the these people are not willing to work with it inside the Democratic Party. The other Freedom Road was working inside the Democratic Party and had a more moderate image. That faction started Black Lives Matter, right? Well, in a few years ago, that faction changed its name to Liberation Road to distinguish themselves from their old friends in Freedom Road. So it's all very confusing, but they're both pro-Chinese communist parties. And both helped to organize the George Floyd riots all across the country and are both involved in anti-ICE protests today. But the most violent faction, the most dangerous faction is the Freedom Road faction, whereas the Liberation Road faction is a little gentler because they have deep ties inside the Democratic Party and they don't want to embarrass the Democrats too much.
So I've heard you speak about this before, and so have I. The other thing I'm watching is the unions. The unions are very much involved. We have SEIU, the healthcare union, out there. They were out there on Friday. They were out there on Saturday, and they're having a work stoppage, a strike per se. I don't know. I didn't go on the website. I don't think they got they voted on it, but they're organizing their teams to do a work stoppage right now.
Mm-hmm.
So what is your investigation? What has it determined in regards to the union's participation and involvement? And what's really interesting is I watched after October 7th, the Palestinian pro-Hamas protests, and almost all the unions got involved with all the protests out on the streets worldwide. And they're doing it again with the anti-ICE protests.
Look, there is virtually no major union body in any Western country that's not communist controlled now. You know, in America, it was different up till about the 1990s. And you actually had conservatives running some unions. Now, every union from the Teamsters to AFSCME to SEIU to the teachers' unions are all communist controlled. So it's not surprising that they are out there now in the forefront of this. Many of their officials are Freedom Road people or Democratic Socialists of America or Communist Party USA.
You see them standing hand in hand in the streets.
Yeah, they're just all part of the same octopus. The unions are part of the communist movement and are led by and large by communists. If you're a member of a union that's paying dues to the AFL-CIO, you're paying communism every week. Every major union in America is now communist controlled. The last ones to fall were the Teamsters, who used to be more of a mafia union. Now they too are heavily infiltrated by Democratic Socialists of America and the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. When the Teamsters almost went out on strike a couple of years ago, that was all organized by the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, a pro-Chinese communist group.
So in your mind or your opinion, I haven't looked into this in depth, to be honest with you, but the Republicans and the Democrats work with the unions. Obviously, we want food on our table. We want medicine on our shelves. We want to be able to put clothes on our backs, and we want the truck drivers to deliver the products and goods to our house and to the store. But the unions are actively working against our federal government and our local governments too. What is the solution on this as far as the unions?
Look, this has to be like Reagan did with the air traffic controllers. This has to be a hard line because most union members are patriots. You know, they're veterans, they belong to the NRA, they go hunting in the weekends, they're normal Americans. But every American labor union is now controlled by communists. So this has to be like RICO. This has to be treated like the mafia. The government has to go after these people, expose their ties to the Chinese and the Venezuelans. This has to be really brought out to the American public, and there have to be arrests here. The Insurrection Act should be applied right now in Minnesota. Now, of course, the media across the country will then call Trump a fascist and a dictator, but they're going to call him that anyway. And this is not going to get better. Look, this was all supposed to start, you know, a few months ago when there were riots in Los Angeles. But Trump wisely called in the National Guard into Los Angeles and shut it down. That was all run by the Freedom Road Socialist Organization as well, and their friends in the Party for Socialism and Liberation, DSA, and Communist Party USA. But Trump shut that down. Okay, but now it's election year. Now it's 2026. If Trump wants to stop the most violent summer we have seen since the Civil War, and that's what it's going to be, we're going to see Islamic terrorism. We're going to see riots on the streets. We're going to see things that make George Floyd riots look like a Sunday picnic. We're going to see heavy stuff because the goal is to destroy Trump and his administration and the Republican Party in the 2026 election, then impeach the heck out of him, then take over in 2028 and legalize all the illegals that are left here and give them all citizenship and voting rights, and America's a communist state.
Well, we saw that in the Jack Smith hearing, the 5-hour and 17-minute Jack Smith hearing last week. I mean, the Democrats are openly coming out and saying that they're going to relitigate Donald Trump in January 6th.
Oh, they're going to come after all of their enemies. We are on the verge. Look, people shouldn't, you know, people say this is hyperbole. No, it's not. We're on the verge of a communist revolution here right now. And Trump can decide to get tough and invoke the Insurrection Act and go in and start arresting people and putting people on trial, or he can let it get way worse and have to deal with a much bigger problem in a couple of months' time, plus Islamic terrorism, plus probably sabotage from the Chinese military-age guys that have been sneaking across the border, the many thousands of them. Look, we are heading, I'm not here to exaggerate or frighten people or whatever. I'm here to tell the truth.
Right.
This is a communist revolution. They're trying to destroy the country. And this is all they have to do. They have to get one more Democrat elected. Then they're going to legalize the 20 or 30 million illegals that are still here and give them citizenship and voting rights. And they have a one-party state from that point. You can never defeat them again. And they will come after their enemies like you would not believe. So we should treat this very seriously.
I have a question for you in regards to Trump. But first, I want to close out the unions and their communists in respect to why we say that. I mean, we watch what's going on in the streets, right? We watch what's going on nationally. We watch what's going on internationally with the unions. But, I mean, it was outlined in Karl Marx's playbook of action on instructions that they say unions must aid every social and political movement tending in that direction, considering themselves and acting as the champions and representatives of the whole working class. And we see that again today, with them being anti-ICE.
Look, Lenin, I think it was, says the unions are the transmission belt of communism to the masses. Correct. Unions are a critical part of this because they provide the muscle, they've got the money, they can basically get behind candidates or sabotage candidates. Unions are a very, very important part of the communist revolution, which is why we see them marching in every demonstration, why we saw them marching for Palestine, why we see them marching against ICE today, because they are controlled by the communist movement, lock, stock, and barrel, and their goal is revolution.
So I have a question for you, and I think you're absolutely correct, spot on in regards to if we lose the midterms, meaning the Republicans, and we lose 2028, what we saw the last 4 years of Biden will be nothing compared to what
Yeah.
we're going to see going forward. So if you could send a message to President Trump right now, because right now we're watching polls come out and he's losing the battle when it comes to his enforcement as far as, ICE on the street, deporting people, etc. How does he turn this around between now and when the midterms happen?
Well, I'd say a combination of things. Two things I would do. I'd invoke the Insurrection Act in Minnesota and any other state that goes into rebellion and start putting people on trial and exposing their ties to foreign governments. The other thing I would do, which he should have done a long time ago, is bring in E-Verify on a national basis, because, look, he's deporting people the most ugly way he can do it. The way that the media can make the most capital. E-Verify, cut off all the jobs and all the welfare, and you will have millions of illegals self-deporting.
So for the people that don't understand what E-Verify is, can you explain that?
That means, which he's promised to do, but it's never done, is every employer must verify electronically the citizenship of any current employee or prospective employee. And if you are caught employing illegals, you will be heavily fined or prosecuted. So basically, if somebody illegal comes for a job, prove your green card, prove your citizenship. If they can't, you cannot employ them. If they're currently working for you, you've also got to check their citizenship. So that puts the onus on every employer. It's a much quieter thing, and it's designed to make people self-deport. You cut off the welfare, you cut off the jobs, they're going home, right? They're going to voluntarily slip across the border without the drama, without the arrests, without the gunplay, all of that. Now, you're still going to have tough enforcement. You're still going to have people going after the gangsters and that. But if you want most of the people out of here, and they've got to be gone because the Democrats are going to legalize them all and give them citizenship and voting rights, and that's the end of America. So, but you got to do it the intelligent way. But Trump's been reluctant to do that because there's people in the Chamber of Commerce and the farming lobby always in his ear. No, we can't. We got to pick our cabbages. We got to run our factories. So he's been going after the violent gangbangers and this kind of thing. No, that's the wrong approach. No, you go after. You just get most of the people to self-deport quietly. But you also have to be willing to invoke the Insurrection Act, put the troops in the street. Look, he proved it when he shut down the riots in California by sending the National Guard. If he hadn't done that, Gavin Newsom would have fanned that flame into a nationwide battle.
So
but Trump wisely shut it down then, but he's got to do it again now because it's much bigger now.
Governor Tim Walz called in the National Guards over the weekend, and we have on-the-ground reporters, independent reporters, showing video of them actually aiding the rioters, giving them donuts and giving them coffee.
Well, that's why this is why it's got to be federal. This is why National Guard from other states, not under the control of Tim Walz. Tim Walz is a communist, a pro-Chinese communist. He is going to get his people. See, you cannot fix Minnesota from Minnesota, just like you can't fix California from California. You got to get out-of-state people who are going to come in who aren't part of the Tim Walz power structure, who are not going to give out donuts to the protesters, who are going to go after the ringleaders and arrest them and put them in federal custody and set them on the road to trials. That's what you have to do, because Tim Walz is an enemy agent. And he's not going to help, and people who work for him are going to follow his orders. So when you've got a hostile governor like Tim Walz or Gavin Newsom, you got to make this federal. You got to bring federal. You got to bring people from other states in, not the locals.
Yeah, and then the judges are going to do TROs to stop them temporarily, at least. So how does Trump change the narrative? Because I've been watching different video clips of newscast people, including Republicans, that are turning against Trump's enforcement, ICE enforcement. The polls are going in the wrong direction. What is the message that the Trump administration needs to send out to bring the public back to his side as far as ICE enforcement?
President Trump has to get on, do a national address to the people and say, look, what we are facing here is not just a law enforcement issue. That is part of it. But we have hard evidence that the people instigating these riots are tied to Venezuela and Cuba and China. They are deeply working with enemies of this country to cause the maximum possible damage to this country, as they have done before. And we are not going to allow this to happen. You know, we understand that these people are violent, that they're working for hostile foreign regimes. And if we give in to them now, it's only going to get worse. So we understand this doesn't look pretty, but I commit to you, the American people, I'm going to clean this up. I'm going to stop these people wrecking our country. And I ask for your support in that.
I agree. So, and to confirm, in regards to what you're saying as far as foreign actors funding, Data Republican on X released a spreadsheet that she developed from what I shared with you yesterday, and I'm sure you've seen it on social media, where Minnesota had a patrol and monitoring group, which included also the lieutenant governor of
Peggy
Minneapolis.
Flanagan. Yeah, who trained in the famous communist Wellstone school, as did Attorney General Keith Ellison, as did Tim Walz himself, as did Amy Klobuchar, the senator. The whole of the Minnesota government is basically Marxist. They've all trained in the same Marxist training schools.
So where I wanted to go with that is that she has a spreadsheet, and she's identified 5,000 people, foreign and domestic funding. So I hope this goes out up to the highest levels in the Trump administration and in Congress. And two things happen. One, the Department of DOJ starts investigations and prosecutions. And two, that Congress writes some type of law to secure it, make it more concrete that this is not allowed, because I'm sure many of the people that have donated or run these NGOs are part of like 501(c)(3)s. That's legally not allowed.
Yeah. Look, we are in the situation we are right now because the law has not been enforced for decades. Treason has been committed on a regular basis by all sorts of actors, including congressmen, with complete impunity, which has led us to the stage we're now in the danger of losing our country. Now, President Trump can manage the destruction of America, or he can take resolute action. Does he have the guts to do it? Because the Republican Party doesn't unless he leads it. The Republican Party will not do it. They will surrender to the communists in the hope that they'll get a little bit of leniency on the way. But, you know, it's that serious. But the American public understand very little of this. If the American public can be shown evidence, this is Venezuelan, this is Chinese, they will support the president. If they are not shown that evidence, if they're not given a clear direction, unfortunately, not enough of them will, and many of them will vote the wrong way accordingly in the next election.
So I have two other questions I want to ask you in regards to the organizations. How is the People Forum involved with all this?
Well, the People's Forum, which is based in New York, is one of many institutions involved in this. Now, that's It's run mainly by the Party of Socialism and Liberation, which is a very pro-China, pro-Russia, pro-Tehran, pro-North Korea Communist Party. But the People's Forum is funded by a guy called Neville Singham, who actually lives in Beijing and is a very wealthy man. His father was a radical with the Black Workers Movement in Sri Lankan, actually, who studied in America, who was a communist in Detroit in the 60s. Neville Singham started that way, but moved into international computerized businesses, working with China. He's a very wealthy man and funds a lot of this revolution. So the People's Forum is getting money from Singham, Singham is based in China and has very close relations with the Chinese Communist Party. So that's one that's very obvious and very clear. But there are many, many more. We shouldn't think of it's all Singham like we shouldn't think it's all Soros, you know. This is multiple sources of income, multiple directions, from Russia, from China, from Cuba, from Venezuela, from Iran, all trying to bring the country to its knees in what they see as a vulnerable moment and end Trump's presidency, the presidency they see as the biggest single threat to their plans. So, yes, Singham should be investigated. His funding should be cut down. The Justice Department should be shutting this down. This is the thing. There's a lot of talk about shutting these things down. Like there was talk about ending the Department of Education, which is still running. Like there's a chance of talk about ending DEI, which is now back on board, you know. So look, either Trump's serious about this or Trump's going to go down as the last Republican president in the United States history. And will then be vilified in every communist history book going forward as the last reactionary before the People's Revolution took over. It's that serious, folks. We are in that much of a serious situation. And believe me, if the United States goes down, so does every other free country. So there ain't going to be nowhere to run to.
That's true. That's absolutely true. So I want to get back to what you mentioned before. I did the 2,300 plus word article on the decades-long strategic framework, which was laid out by progressive ideologues in Minnesota, drawing from global color revolution tactics seen in Eastern Europe and beyond. And that particular organization in Minnesota, I believed, targeted Minnesota specifically to change the way the Midwestern region, and then to use that as a blueprint across America. And that organization is called Wellstone Action. If you can just give us a history on Wellstone Action and their success, just so the audience knows, since their inception, and they have rebranded, by the way.
Yeah, they're now called...
hold on just a second. Since their inception, they have trained think about this as Trevor speaks, they have trained over 90,000 people in their training camps.
Yeah. Well, Wellstone Action is named after the famous former senator from Minnesota called Paul Wellstone, who died in a plane crash in about 2000 or 2001. He was about to announce a second run for Senate, I think, and everybody knew he was going to run for president one day. He was the Bernie Sanders before there was a Bernie Sanders. He was Democratic Socialists of America, the largest Marxist group, got him elected. Absolutely got him elected. He was almost certainly a member of that group. He was involved with the New American Movement before that, which was an amalgamation of former Communist Party members and former SDS members. He was a hardcore Marxist, but he died in a plane crash. So people like Francis Fox Piven, the famous DSA Marxist, and many others set up this group called the Wellstone Action to train people in his name. And they got a lot of government funding, and a lot of private funding, a lot of foundation money. And as you say, trained 90,000 people, including Tim Walz, including the Attorney General of Minnesota, Keith Ellison, including Peggy Flanagan, the deputy, the lieutenant governor of Minnesota, and including Amy Klobuchar, the senator from Minnesota. Minnesota is run by Wellstone people, and they were
Right.
Marxists. It was a Marxist training school. So they have fanned these people out all over the country into other states and other organizations and have massive influence. But you need to understand it's a Marxist organization. Minnesota is run as a Marxist state. It's not like Cuba, but all of the leading politicians are Marxists. And that goes back 100 years when there was a failed communist revolution in Russia in 1905, and Finland was part of the Russian Empire, and thousands of communist Finns fled to America and they settled in the Iron Range of northern Minnesota. They had communist communes all over northern Minnesota. They had communist bakeries and communist coffee companies. It was a communist area. And most states, the rural areas are conservative. Well, in Minnesota, the rural areas were more conservative than the more communist than the cities were. So then the communists started up the Farmer Labor Party,
Yes.
which then amalgamated with the Democratic Party to form today's Democratic Farmer Labor Party. DSA got big in the state. Freedom Road got big in the state. The Wellstone was big in the state. Minnesota has been run by communists for the better part of a century now. So it's not surprising that they then invited in thousands and thousands of Somalis to dilute the conservative voting base even more and create even more social tensions, because Minnesota is communist central in the Midwest. And now it's no accident that what we're seeing now is starting in Minnesota. But it won't end in Minnesota, I can guarantee you that.
No, I looked online last night before I went to bed, and there's planned protests across the country. How big it is now today, I don't know. But these 90,000 plus organizations, whether they're 501(c)(3)s or others, they're well organized, they're well tuned, they coordinate with each other, and we will see more explosive protests going forward in the coming weeks.
Yeah.
Right. So I want to ask you, I want to go back to your book on Kamala Harris. And we're talking about Tim Walz. You talked about the history of Minnesota and the farmers and the farmer labor unions and whatnot. And I'm thinking in my mind, based on the article that I did yesterday and what you're saying today, is it made perfect sense for Kamala Harris to pick Tim Walz over someone else because of the conservative base in Minnesota that are farmers hoping to switch over those constituents and maybe more across the country. Is that the way you viewed it?
Well, look, logically, it would have been better for Kamala Harris to choose, was it Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania? That was more of a swing state, and he was regarded as more of a moderate. She might have had a chance of winning with him, Josh Shapiro. But Walz came from the same Chinese communist camp she did and was running a already communist state. It was really a foregone conclusion that she would go with Walz, because Walz would have been her successor. She would have wanted Walz to succeed her, not Josh Shapiro, who's not a communist. He's a left-wing Democrat, but he's not a communist. One of the rare leading Democrats who isn't. And so, look, I always thought it was logical that you would choose Tim Walz because he came out of the Minnesota branch of the same pro-Chinese communist movement that she came out of in California.
And what is that movement?
Sorry?
And what is that movement? I know that I used to take her to Black Panther meetings and speeches and whatnot.
Yeah, her parents were both pro-Chinese communists. She grew up in the communist movement. Her whole career in California was guided by pro-Chinese communists. Steve Phillips, Willie Brown. She has never been anything but a communist. That's why she can't speak American, because she was brought up speaking communese. She has to translate it, into American English, which is why she's so terrible at messaging. But Tim Walz, since his teens, he's taken 23 trips to China. He was sending Chinese young Minnesota kids to China. to basically be indoctrinated by the Chinese communists, very actively working with the local Chinese community, communist Chinese community in Minnesota. Minnesota was, as I say, has been a communist base for over a century. So it made sense for Kamala Harris, as the California branch of the Chinese Communist movement, to get a deputy, a VP from the Midwestern branch of the Chinese Communist movement, rather than someone like Josh Shapiro, who might have been harder to control.
So what do you know about the lieutenant governor in Minnesota and Keith Ellison, if we get into that in more detail?
Well, Peggy Flanagan is the lieutenant governor, and she was a trainer at the Wellstone School, very much involved with the Marxist movement, a Native American, very much a Native American radical. Keith Ellison is the Attorney General, a former congressman, who was basically also a trainer at the Wellstone School, but also very deeply embedded with Democratic Socialist America, and was funded and had several fundraising events held at the home of the head of the Minnesota Communist Party, a man called Erwin Marquette. Marquette was a very active part of Ellison's team. Ellison was also involved in the Nation of Islam. Then he became a Sunni Muslim, very much involved with CARE, very much involved with the Maoists, and also in later years involved with the Iranians, the Shia branch of Islam, much like Zohran Mandami is in New York. So he has got Keith Ellison is public enemy number one when it comes to America. He's involved with Shia Islam, Sunni Islam, Maoism, straight up communism, and Democratic Socialists of America. Every strand of anti-Americanism in Minnesota, he is the poster boy for it. And he's the Attorney General, so he can decide who gets prosecuted and who doesn't. That's why you can't fix the riots from Minnesota, because Keith's gonna let them all go. If they get arrested, he ain't gonna prosecute them, because he is their man. He is the legal cover for the communist and Islamic movement in Minnesota.
Right. It's like one of those churn style things that you go through at a subway where people get arrested and then are out within 2 hours or 24 hours or whatever, and then they go back out and do the same thing again.
Yeah, exactly. They don't get a record, they don't get prosecuted, they don't get fined.
Right.
They just they just go into the cells, get a cup of coffee, get processed, and they're straight out in the street again. Look, that's Philadelphia. That's Larry Krasner. That was George Gascon in Los Angeles, who's thankfully gone now. That was Boudin, a long-time communist family, brought up by the Weather Underground terrorist, Chaser Boudin, who was the district attorney in San Francisco, a post previously held by Kamala Harris when the communists put her in that post as well. That's why these cities are so lawless, because for many years, through working through the communist-controlled National Lawyers Guild, they have taken over the legal system in the blue states, and they prosecute conservatives, but they don't prosecute leftists.
So
that's why we have such lawlessness in those states.
Right. So I did a post, and nothing against representing an individual. That's what a lawyer is supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
But we have the ACLU and others that are clearly on the side of the illegal immigration, anti-ICE, anti-government. There's an organization that I came across yesterday that is called the Independent Defense Fund in Minnesota.
Okay.
And they're behind the ACLU and others. So what would you, what are your thoughts? What's from your research as far as all these, the Lawyers Guild, like you said, all three of these organizations?
Well, they're all communist organizations. See, this is the thing I think most Americans have no idea of, because their media hasn't told them and their government said nothing. Most Americans think communism died in 1991 And, the Soviet Union went away. And yes, it's okay, there's Chinese, but they're not really communists because they have capitalism, Look, communism has never been stronger in America than it is today. Because now there isn't one communist party, there's 30. Now they don't control a few college campuses, they control the majority of them. Now they haven't infiltrated a few churches, they control most. Now they control organized a major sport, the woke sport. Now they control Hollywood. Now they control most of the media organizations in this country, and they completely control the Democratic Party. So we are hanging on by our fingernails here, folks. Communism, when I say we're in a communist revolution, that's not hyperbole, that's not exaggeration. That is a bare stating of the facts of the matter. And as I repeat, all they have to do is win one more time for the Democrats and legalize every single illegal immigrant still remaining in the country and give the Democrats a 10 or 15 million permanent majority. And that's it for the GOP. That's it for the Constitution. They'll stack the Supreme Court, and that's it for a free America. We'll have a communist America going forward. And that's a few months away if we don't do this right.
Well, let's go to New York. You and Robert Spencer, and forgive me, I forget the third person. It was Frank Gaffney, if I remember correctly, was on a panel before Mamdani was elected, and you talked about this specifically. And I mean, this is the playbook of the communist jihadist movement. I mean, you can go back to Iran in 1979.
Yes,
in regards to that. And we watched, America watched, my audience watched the DSA become very effective in New York City. New York City is the financial capital of the world. So given what happened in New York.
Not for much longer.
Not for much longer, right? I'd like you to give a current update on what your thoughts are in regards to Mamdani in New York, and what is the strength of the Democrat Socialist Party of America?
Yeah.
And how much should we fear that in 2026?
Yeah. Look, first thing to realize, Democratic Socialists of America, like a friend of mine talked to an FBI agent and said, you guys should investigate Democratic Socialists of America. And this FBI guy said, oh, no, we can't do that. They're democratic. Okay. Look, DSA is a full-on communist organization. It's as communist as the Communist Party of Cuba. They are linked to the Communist Party of Cuba. They support the communists in Venezuela. They are also linked to the Communist Party of China. That came out in Newsweek this week. I knew that for a long time, but it came out publicly in Newsweek. It is a communist party which has 95,000 members now. So what they do, the reason they're so effective, when AOC got elected, when Zoran Mamdani got elected, when Rashida Tlaib got elected, they federalized that. So, okay, the Democrat goes into the mayoral election in New York with, say, 1,000 volunteers. They've got 11 to 12,000 members in New York alone. So they're all out there pounding the streets for Mamdani. Plus, they've got another 20 or 30,000 who are manning the phone banks from Kansas City, from San Francisco, from Minneapolis, from wherever else they are. So they can win elections because they can mobilize 10 or 20,000 people to knock on doors and phone call and whatever to do it. So that's why the Democratic Party fears them. And so they are taking over the Democratic Party. There's close to 20 DSAs running for Congress this election cycle. Now, I'd say probably half of them won't get elected, but half of them will. They've already got 6 or 7 in there now. They've already got 6 or 7 on the New York City Council. Brad Lander, who's running for Congress, is a member of DSA, and he was Zoran's deputy. Jerry Nadler, who's retiring, has been a DSA member for 40 years. In the same situation in Chicago, the same situation in Milwaukee and Detroit, same situation in Boston, same situation in Los Angeles, Portland, Oregon, and many other blue cities around the country. They had taken over school boards, county commissions. They're running for state rep. They're taking over Democratic Party branches all over the country. Their aim is to either completely replace the Democratic Party or destroy it and set up another party. But they are communists. They work with, they're as communist as the Communist Party. In fact, Democratic Socialist America isn't one organization. Every major communist party in America has members inside DSA. Liberation Road does, Freedom Road does, League of Revolutionaries for a New America, Communist Party USA, Socialist Alternative. They all have members inside DSA. It's a very permeable organization. Plus, they're aligned to communists in Mexico. Plus, they're aligned to communists in Nicaragua and Brazil. It's a communist organization that can put people in Congress, elect people like Zoran Mandami. They have 4 people on the LA City Council now, 4 people on the Portland, Oregon City Council, about 6 or 8 on the Chicago City Council, and they start to form majority blocks. So they are taking over the Democratic Party. Now, I will say this, Nancy Pelosi is as much of a communist as AOC. Chuck Schumer is as bad as probably Zoran Mandami, but they have responsible positions and can't talk like they really want to talk. We're seeing now DSA is making communism okay. It is making it okay with the young people. And so that's why we should fear DSA. That's why they should be investigated like the Communist Party used to be investigated. The government came after the Communist Party, put some of them in jail, and made them testify before Congress, and shut them down. Basically, destroyed the Communist Party in the 50s. That could be done again if the government was willing to do its job. These are political hearings, criminals. Right? Yeah. Well, it wasn't just the McCarthy hearings. The House Un-American Activities Committee was started by the Democrats. Everybody forgets this. Mm-hmm. It was started by the Democrats in the 30s to go after the American Nazis, the Communist Party, and the Klan. It was in the 50s. It was almost because they destroyed the Klan, they destroyed the Nazis. It was only the communists left standing. So they went after the communists with bipartisan support. They cleaned them up pretty well. Like an FBI guy told me, he said, look, we had the communists under control. He said, for example, in the early 60s, the Northern California Communist Party had 5 leaders. 3 of them were FBI informants. They had them under control. But since the 70s, since the church hearings, when the pro-communist senator from Idaho, Frank Church, basically gutted the CIA and the FBI, the communists have been unmolested. They've and what do you do if you have cancer in your body and you cut 90% of it out, but then you stop all treatment for 30 years? What's your body going to look like? It
metastasizes.
And that's exactly what the communists have done. Now they are Black Lives Matter. Now they're the transgender movement. Now they're the vote fraud movement. Now they're the environmental radical movement. Now they're woke Hollywood. Now they're woke sport. Now they're woke churches. That's what the communist movement has done. It's metastasized and is now more powerful than it has ever been before in American history.
Right, and then Obama gutted more as far as the FBI's ability.
He put it on steroids. Obama. Look, for instance, the last time the FBI went after a communist group was the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, when they arrested 24 of them in 2010 in Minnesota and Chicago. That was but Eric Holder shut that down, the Obama's Attorney General, because they started to find many of the people they arrested in Chicago used to work with Obama. And it would have been too embarrassing to have. And these were communists.
Give us more details, please.
Yeah, they were arrested for working with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a designated terrorist organization, and the Colombian FARC, another designated terrorist group that made its money selling cocaine to American kids. They had them dead to rights, but the investigation was shut down because it would have dragged Obama into it.
Wow. So we're about ready to wrap it up here today, Trevor. So if you would please, give yourself a shout out as far as where people can find you, your website, your books, where you want to direct people, and then anything that we have not covered yet today that you would like to cover.
Well, look, I would say this. Go to keywiki.org. I've 180,000 files of American communists, socialists, radicals. Look up DSA in your town. Look up, if you're in Boise, look up Boise Democratic Socialists of America, and you'll recognize the names there. If you're in Central Valley, California, look up Central Valley DSA. If you're in Hartford, Connecticut, look up the Connecticut DSA. Whatever, it'll all be there. So go to trevorloudon.com. I have a whole bunch of books there. Stealth, Kamala Harris's Communist Roots. It was called by the Christian Anti-Communist Crusade the Book of the Century, because it details the Chinese takeover of the Democratic Party. It's not just about Kamala. It's about Tim Walz. It's about a whole bunch of senators, It's about how the Chinese took over the Democratic Party. Book of the century,
Yes.
So my books are all there, trevorloudon.com. I've about 15 books. Another series called Security Risks Senators, profiling 40 currently serving US senators. Another series of books called House Un-Americans, which will eventually profile about 100 currently serving US Congress members with their communist ties. And a great video, great movie, Enemies Within the Church, which details the Marxist takeover of the evangelical
What's it called?
churches.
What's the name of that film? Documentary?
Enemies Within the Church.
Okay, there's another one that you did too, isn't there?
Yeah, Enemies Within. Yeah, Enemies Within, which was about the Marxist and Islamist takeover of the US Congress. That got 2 million views, I think, on Amazon Prime. And I think it was Amazon Prime, and they took it down before the 2020 election. So, all my stuff there is all well documented. You don't come to a foreign country. I'm from New Zealand. You don't come to a foreign country and name a whole lot of this country's leaders as traitors unless you have the evidence to back it up. And I have the evidence. trevorloudon.com.
So I will put the information on how people can find your work in the show notes and the description once I publish this full-length interview. I just want to say thank you very much, Trevor. We met quite a while ago now. We went through some technical issues when it came to doing X Spaces, and then I decided in the middle of being sick to start a podcast. So
Well,
it's
good for
really
you.
wonderful
Good
to
for
meet
you.
you.
Well, it's great to meet you, Andrea. And I just want to say at the end of the day, I think we both understand this is a spiritual battle. This isn't Republican versus Democrat. It's not even communist versus the Constitution. This is God versus the devil playing out in our daily politics right in front of us. We have a chance to turn this republic around, to usher in an age of freedom and prosperity like we have never seen before. We have that opportunity. And if we don't take that, we will consign ourselves and our kids to misery like we have never seen. We'll consign the world to North Korea worldwide with American surveillance technology. That's what we're facing here. But I do not believe that God wants this country lost. And what it's going to take is faith and courage. We've got to believe we can win. We've got to believe that God's in heaven. We've got to believe it's right to save America. And we've got to have the courage to do what has to be done. Courage proves faith. Faith pleases God. And God stands up for those who believe in him. That's
Amen, Trevor.
what we got to think going forward.
Amen, Trevor. Thank you so much for coming on to the show today. And I hope you do come back, Trevor. Anytime there's some breaking news or new information that you want to share to the world, feel free to contact me. Text is probably the best. And you do have my email too. So
Yeah.
again, it's been a wonderful pleasure to have you on today. And we'll
Look,
see you
I'll
again.
do that, Andrea, because yours is an intelligent show for thinking people, and I enjoy the format. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Trevor. God bless, and send love to your wife, your lovely wife.
Thank you. And
good night, everybody. We'll see you in the next episode. More to come. We have some really big, influential people that have agreed to come on my show. And until then, God bless America and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
History shows that it is precisely when totalitarian regimes begin to decay from within. It is precisely when they feel the first real stirrings of domestic unrest